Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to play with markers. That sounds pretty fun, huh? Honestly, I started off just kind of showing what these markers were all about, but I kept having ideas on different things I wanted to try with them, so I had to keep going back to my studio and adding stuff to this video. So hopefully it's not going to be 3 years long and we can get through it in a fairly concise amount of time. The markers we're using are the Ohuhu paper-friendly markers, and their claim to fame is that you can color 20 layers without the paper pilling. We're going to put that claim to the test. We're also going to create a bunch of projects with these markers. So in the case, you get a printed swatch card there, the glossy one, plus a card that you can color. And I do recommend swatching your markers out because the lids never match exactly. Now these markers have black writing on white barrels. They're all named and numbered, making it really easy to find the marker that you need. And you can keep them in order in the case, or you can do what I typically do, which is pull them all out, throw them in jars, and then put them all back when I'm done crafting for the day. But this case is very handy if you like to craft on the go, or you like to sit on the couch and color while you're watching TV. This will keep them from running away on you. The brush end caps will post on the fine tip end cap. Just don't push it too hard. Trust me, if you push it on there too hard, you'll have to, struggle with some pliers to get them apart. So gently. And we're going to take a look at what the nibs look like. So the brush nib is very much like a Tombow or Memento brush nib. It goes from thick to thin pretty easily, and we'll do a few little tests here. It's really easy to use. I would think if you're doing brush lettering, it would be quite nice too. If you're used to using like a Tombow marker, the nibs felt closest to the Tombow in my scientific comparisons that I was doing with every marker I had basically. And you can see you get a pretty decent amount of flex there. They are more flexible than the previous versions of Ohuhu water-based brush pens. If you have those, these are a little bit more soft and flexible, and they're also juicier, which is going to give us some more options as far as the techniques that we can do. Now the fine tip end, you have a fine liner. It is it's kind of like the fine liner tip you would see on a Micron pen. These are water-based ink though. They can go under alcohol markers without smudging, but they may smudge under watercolors, although they don't blend out with water as much as some other markers do. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about how you want to use these products. The fine liner tip is right around a 0.5 to 0.8 size, and there you can see a close-up of how they look. Since I think that these markers are going to appeal to adult coloring book enthusiasts the most, I decided I would start off by coloring in an adult coloring book. I'm using the Birdtopia coloring book that I received for Christmas from my sister a few years ago, and the illustrations are so pretty. I thought it would be a great way to test out these markers. The paper in this book is a nice quality, medium weight paper, I would say. It's not as thin as copy paper, but it's not as thick as cardstock, and it does have a nice smooth surface, so I thought it would be really good for these markers. Now I'm able to layer up really well on this paper. Every once in a while I'm peeking in the back of the book because there's a colored illustration that I can see what this hummingbird is supposed to look like, just to get a little bit of an idea. And yeah, I'm just kind of enjoying myself here. Didn't really think too much about the markers because they glide smoothly. I was able to layer up. I didn't get a lot of blending, so that's one thing I noticed, that if I wanted to say have a medium purple, the one between my light and my dark purple, I would be better off just to kind of flick in that light purple over the medium into the light area to build up my color that way. The tones on this paper that's got almost a little bit of a smooth glossiness to it. I wouldn't call it glossy, but it's almost got a finish to it. I found that my colors looked a little bit lighter on this paper versus the absorbent swatch card that came with the markers, so something to keep in mind. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because if you can layer up your markers over and over again, you can keep layering it up until you get the color you like, which is really a benefit, I think. And I can kind of do some painterly effects with the brush tip. I'm just kind of dabbing the red over the pink to give it that kind of ruby-throated look. I want it to have a little bit of an iridescent look, and I can also get plenty of detail with a brush tip here on the edge of those kind of pale cream feathers that I've painted in there. When you're doing small detailed areas, I would recommend switching over to the fine tip, just because it's going to flow out less ink at one time, because it does have like a little metal holder there rather than like your felt bullet that would, like a Tombow has that felt bullet nib. So I found it very easy to control, and I really like the way this turned out. To get a good idea of how those markers would feel next to markers I was more familiar with, I decided to color the second hummingbird on this page using a combination of some Tombow markers, some Memento markers, some real brush pens, and just basically a variety of water-based markers that I'm familiar with using. I will say that the colors were stronger from the other markers that I used, and they did seem a little bit streaky, I think because I couldn't layer up those subtle tones that I could on the larger bird there, but they didn't feel terribly different. I would say that the paper-friendly markers from Ohuhu glided a little bit more. They just felt a little bit smoother, like they have more like lubricant, more glycerin in them or something. But honestly, I think both worked well on this paper, but I can see where the paper-friendly markers are a little bit softer to the paper or something. It's kind of hard to describe, but I did want to use those other markers side by side just to get a feel for how they look. I think with the paper friendly ones though, I get a little bit more of a subtle finish, and I really like the look of that. I decided to do a layering test with the new Ohuhu markers and compare it to some of the other markers I was using on that second bird drawing. So I'm going to start off with the Ohuhu paper-friendly markers, then the older Ohuhus, and then the other brands that I have, just so we can see, you know, apples to apples, what are we getting for layering on this paper. I'll do the test again on Bristol just for some comparison, but we're going to do that, and we're also going to do some blending tests just to kind of see how well these markers blend. And here is how I'm doing my layers. I overlap a little bit on each layer. So, I mean, I guess to be pedantic, I don't know if you want to call my layers one layer each or two layers each, just because of how I tend to color. But knowing that I overlap a little bit, I was able to get 6 layers before the paper pilled. I started to feel a little bit of friction at layer 6, but I was still getting a smooth result, so that's why I'm calling it 6 layers. So I grabbed my old Ohuhu markers just to compare, and those were chewing the paper up at 3 layers. So definitely these new ones are better than the older versions as far as layering. And then I wanted to try my Whispers markers. These are a discontinued marker that I have in my stash because they're still juicy and they still work. And they did pretty well. They did 6 layers too, but not as smooth as the Ohuhu. And then I'm also doing my Tombows over here to the side, and I was able to get 7 layers with the Tombows, and they were pretty smooth. So these layer pretty much like Tombows. So if you're looking for a more budget-friendly version of Tombows, that would work pretty well. Now this is the marker they most remind me of, and that would be the Memento markers, which are about $4 to $5 a pop. So definitely the Ohuhus are more budget-friendly. I was able to get 7 layers with Memento. The Spectrum Noir was chewing the paper up at 3 layers. That's not my favorite marker, but I had them, so I decided to grab them and try them out for this. And then the Real Brush pens performed very well. I was able to get about 10 layers, but the bristles are so gentle and soft, I wasn't really surprised by that. So now we're going to look at blends and see how these markers blend. I didn't have as much blending luck as I would have liked to on the Hummingbird, but since they layered up so well, I could just keep layering up my lighter tones to get what I needed. But I was curious to see if I could get them to blend. So I started off with my dark color and tried to blend it out with my light color, because I do that a lot when I'm using water-based markers, and it wasn't budging. I was not getting a very good result there. So I decided to just kind of experiment with a lighter color. I tried the colorless blender, but that didn't really do much. So I decided to just try a couple little samples here. The green I found did pretty well when I did light and then dark and then light again. So I thought, oh, I just need a different technique for these. I think I need to go light and then dark and then the light again, or a medium tone. And that's what I did here with the Tombow and Whispers markers. I just decided to use them together since they're so similar, and I had them both out. And I was able to get a little bit better of a blend, although I was getting a little bit of paper pilling at the darker edge where I was trying to get it to blend out. And then, of course, the Real Brush pens blended very easily. They always do, because they're so gentle that they don't dig at the paper. And that's basically what's going to give you an anti-pilling marker, will be how soft the tip is and how much lubricant there is in the ink. And I think that's where Ohuhu improved from their older marker. They added more lubricant, probably glycerin, and they have a softer tip than the older Ohuhu marker. Now I'm going to try that green blend again with the new paper-friendly markers just to see if I can get results similar to the Tombow. So I'm going in with my lightest color, then I'm going in with my darkest color, and then I grabbed a mid-tone to bring in between, and I'm layering up. I want to see how this is going to do with the layering, and because it does layering well, I was able to get a good blend, but it's not the blending that's making the colors transition. It's more of the fact that I can keep layering. I grabbed a sheet of Bristol because that's typically what I use for water-based markers, and I'm going to repeat the test to see if I get some different results. I'm getting very smooth coverage here, and all in all, I think I like the Bristol better. It's able to absorb the ink a little bit better. And like I said, I'm not letting this dry in between layers, and I do overlap in my layers. So what I consider one layer, maybe 2 layers. So I was able to get between 6 and 10 layers. At layer 6, I'm able to feel a little bit of difference in the paper. And at 10 layers, I'm starting to get a little bit of a crumbing of the paper. So I'm using I actually found another version of Ohuhu markers that were released between the originals and these, and I was getting tension on the paper at about 3 layers and pilling at 4 layers. And this is the original Ohuhus here that I got a lot of pilling on the coloring book page, and I am starting to get a little bit of a crumbing here at 3 layers, and yeah, that's pretty much all that one's going to do. So then going into my other brands, I've got some Tombow here. We're going to do our layers. Again, like I said, I overlap. So if you want to count my 1 layer as 2 layer, you absolutely can do that. And I was getting a pretty even coat. I was able to get 6 to 7 layers before I got pilling. So definitely the Ohuhu Paper Friendly was taking a little bit more ink, but it is pretty similar, to be honest. And then I was using the Whispers markers, which are no longer available, but I know many of us have them. So on the Bristol paper, I was able to get between 8 and 12 layers. So what the Ohuhu Paper Friendly markers are saying to me is that they're a good quality marker, basically. They are equivalent to Tombow or Memento at a much more affordable price point. We're talking 50 cents versus $3 to $5 a marker. So you can't really complain about that. No, the real brush pens, it's really hard to tell what's a layer. You can almost go in, an infinite amount, but I was saying probably about 8 to 12 there before I got any sort of crumbing on the paper. Now I wanted to see how these were going to reactivate with water, so I decided to heat set them to be fair, and I added some water. I could barely blend out the paper friendly markers. I was able to blend out the original Ohuhu markers a little bit more, and these are all their water-based, not their alcohol ones, all the water-based, and the other markers blended out to varying degrees. The Ohuhu will leave a water spot if you drop water on it, but it's not going to blend out perfectly. Now that I've got the feel of the markers, and I even did those tests on Bristol, I decided to stamp an image on some Bristol and color it and make a card with it. So generally, I would not attempt to do a background in markers, but because these are paper friendly and I can layer them and not worry about getting the paper all chewed up, I thought, oh, why not? I'm going to give it a try. So I started off with this really pale blue, and I wanted to blend it into a darker blue. So I'm using the darker blue at the top. I'm scribbling that onto a palette, and then I'm picking it up with that lighter marker and getting a really nice gradient. Now, if it's not perfect, I'm not worried because I can repeat that pattern as much as I want because these are paper friendly. Now, I mentioned before about the paper being wet as I'm adding my layers. If you let those layers dry, I think that's going to give you more options and more ability to layer because you've let the paper fibers kind of shrink back down. When paper fibers get wet, they kind of swell up a little bit, and I think it's that swelling that lets the ends of the fibers lift up, and that's where you get the pilling. So if you're having some issues, even if you don't have these markers and you're having issues with your paper pilling, let your layers dry in between if you're using a water-based marker. That might help it a little bit. Now, another thing that's kind of neat about these markers is that if you wanted to use them over alcohol markers, they're not going to smudge your alcohol markers. If you want to use alcohol markers over these, the alcohol markers aren't going to smudge your paper-friendly markers. So it's kind of, they're almost invisible to each other. So it's a great way if you want to adjust something, but you're afraid of smearing what you have underneath. You just have to make sure if you're stamping that whatever ink you use to stamp is suitable for that. And like I said, this is the this is the Ranger Archival ink, which is a waterproof ink. And I like to use it when I'm using watercolors or water-based markers. I like the effect of layering over, like doing the, using the thicker end to do the ferns and stuff over the background. It almost gives it a little bit of a fuzzy glow. And if you ever see fiddleheads or ferns, they've got that little bit of a fuzz when they're new and just kind of unfurling. And I think it also gives it a bit of a mystical quality. And the stamps I'm using are from Creative Expressions, but they're a few years old, so they are probably no longer still around, but you can always find a coloring page online and print it out on cardstock or Bristol and do something very similar. I like how if I don't have exactly the right color to be a shadow, all I have to do is let something dry and then I can come back and layer up for my shadow. And it does layer so well and so subtly because the light colors really are nice and light. They're easy to work with. So that's part of, I think, the benefit of the color palette just as much as it is the paper friendliness of the markers. So there's a lot of different factors that go into how your markers are going to behave. And that's why I wanted to do a lot of comparison, because you may have a very similar marker at home already, or maybe you've been thinking about buying one of the other brands that I mentioned and you want to see how it compares, whether the other brand is worth the extra money or if you can go with the Ohuhu and be happy. So I hope this review is helping you with that. And please feel free to ask any questions in the comments below if I wasn't clear on something. I will have to say that I'm not a coloring book artist, so I can't help that much for recommendations on coloring books, but there are tons of groups and channels out there about that are probably reviewing these markers too if you want another perspective, which is always smart before you add something to your stash. Now, the neat thing about these stamps though is that the door is separate and there's a variety of doors I could stamp on there, and I have little dies that will cut out the doors. So I've been wanting to use these. I don't know what's my problem, why I haven't already, but it was really a fun excuse to use those today. And I love that little bunting there. So cute. So fun. Another fun thing about these markers having the fine liner ends, if you've done some stamping and maybe your stamping was not great or you didn't like the way an outline was done, you can go in with the closest match to whatever stamping ink you used and add in any missing lines. So if you're not a perfect stamper like me and you have a line that doesn't stamp very well, you can go in and fix it with your markers. Now I'm coloring pretty quickly, and I did time lapse this, but it is a little bit streaky up there, and I think it's because I only put one scant layer because I knew I wanted to add red, and I'm still kind of in the mindset of I'm using markers that are going to pill the paper. I need to just chill out because I can keep saturating it. I'm also using palette blending here because I'm trying to go from a really kind of deep scarlet all the way up to an orange in the highlight area. So by scribbling on that plastic and picking it up with my lighter color, I'm able to get that transition color, that will work with alcohol markers too. So I want you to get ideas from this. Even if you're not interested in these markers, get some ideas that you can use on your next project. That's what even a review video this isn't a review, but even watching a tutorial or a review that's something different, it can still give you ideas on how you can use the things that you already have in your stash. I really love the light tones in this set. It does make it easier to layer up and get the appearance of a blend going because you're layering. I think it was very well thought out. Kudos to Ohuhu for this color palette. It's very nice. And I'm adding some darker greens in there because I pretty much had just used that lighter color, and I think it needed a little bit of contrast. And yeah, we've pretty much colored this whole background, and now we can work on the door and what's inside of it. I stamped a cute little bunny in a cradle for the inside of the card or it's not even the inside of the card, just when you open the door, you'd be able to see that. And I thought it'd be sweet to have a background or a wall that had some wallpaper on it and then some floorboards under the cradle. I used a T-square to make sure my line was straight, and that's kind of the fun thing about stamps. You mix and match, you combine different sets, and you make, scenes sometimes. I don't know. It's fun. Maybe this is completely boring. If not, you can skip ahead to the next idea. But yeah, I'm just kind of freehanding some texture for some wood grain and just coloring these in easy as pie. It really was. It was quite easy. Now, one thing I'd recommend, whenever you have like a blank area, this could be at a coloring page, it could be on a stamped area, but if you have like a large expanse where not much is going on, think about adding some pattern. And that's what I'm going to do in the on the background to make wallpaper. I'm just basically adding stripes, and then I'm going to cross the stripes over the other way and add some thicker lines, and that's basically going to turn into a plaid wallpaper. It's very easy, but it adds a little bit of texture and a little bit of fun. You could also do little hearts, you could do little spirals, whatever sort of design you enjoy doodling would be a fun area, a fun way to fill in the a wall area or someplace where you have just kind of a boring, plain, open area of color. I also wanted to color the back side of the door because it would be seen, and just making some faux wood grain again, nothing too fancy. And there you can see the card put together. I think it is so cute. And there you can see my mess up because I don't stamp things perfect on the first time. So the back of the card is kind of messed up. I'm going to adhere that onto some craft cardstock, and there is a sweet card that I can give away. So then I started thinking about cards, and one of my favorite techniques to do for cards with markers is to use the markers to color up my rubber stamps and stamp with. So you want to start with your lightest color. I started with a light pink and colored this rubber stamp of magnolias, and then I added some dark pink shading, then I added some green on the leaves. Basically, you just color in specifically each little part of the stamp that you want to stamp that color. And then to get a watercolory look, just take a spray bottle and you will just spritz it with some water and then press it down on your paper, and you'll get a really pretty kind of a soft watercolory look. But then you can also do it because these markers are so juicy and they stay wet so long, you don't actually have to spray it with water. So this time I am doing some purples and some greens and, you know, getting all those juicy colors in there. And I'm just going to stamp it straight onto the paper. Just remember, lightest colors first, darkest colors last, and then you won't contaminate the tips of your markers. I get a crisper and darker impression not spraying it with the water first, and because these markers have the extra juiciness to them, they stay wetter longer. So let me know if you'd like a tutorial on how I made these cards, and I can do that for you too. Because the ink stays wet so long, I wondered if I could heat emboss with these. So I wrote the word hi using a red marker, using the brush tip, and then I sprinkled on some embossing enamel, which is basically a fine ground plastic product that you heat up with a heat tool and it will melt and give you a shiny coating. It's kind of an old school stamping supply. I'm going to heat this up with my heat tool, and you got to work kind of quick though, because you've got to get that powder on there before the ink dries. I just want to be completely up front there. You don't want to do anything really elaborate or you won't have time to heat it up before it dries. And here you can see we got a nice glossy image. If you want to have an even shinier image, you can go over the image again with your marker so that you basically add on another layer of wet ink and then sprinkle on your embossing powder and heat it again, and you'll get an ultra glossy image. And I think that looks so pretty. And you could do whatever sentiment you want or whatever little design you want to accent a card or even a coloring book page, because you could draw little designs in a background, sprinkle it with the powder and heat it up as well. So that's called embossing enamel. I'll put a link to it in the video description if you're looking for that. I hope that this video has sparked all kinds of creative ideas on how you can use the stuff in your stash. Maybe you already have markers that are similar, or maybe you want to check out these brand new paper-friendly markers from Ohuhu, our sponsor. I will link to them. You can find them on Amazon as well as ohuhu.com, and they're a really great value considering any comparable markers I tried were about 8 times the price. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up and let me know if you want that other card making tutorial. Until next time, happy crafting.